Hello, everyone.
Hi
Hello.
guys. Hello everyone in the comments. Lots of people here already, I see. That's nice.
Chat.
How's
That's
it
what they
going?
call it. That's what the youngsters do now. They say chat. Hey, chat. They just
Hey.
talk to all the different people as if it's one thing. It's an
That's
interesting
gonna
phenomenon I've noticed.
the children who grow up in that, they're gonna start learning that that's like what you're supposed to say even in real life. So they're gonna start saying that to people in real life,
Yeah.
Hey chat.
Yeah. They'll just be real people on the street, passing by. Hey, chat.
Like and subscribe is what they'll say when they leave.
So
Smash that like button. See you next week.
we've got a good show coming up this week. We have, or today, we have Sascha Bailey arriving later on, who I'm very interested in talking to. He was kind of outed as someone who was considering transitioning by a gossip column, and now he's kind of taking his story and is using it to help other people who might be in the same position, So he's going to be interesting to talk to.
I am looking forward to that a lot, actually.
Yeah.
I think that is a very interesting angle that we really haven't spoken about very much. So
Yes.
yeah, that is good.
It's going to be very interesting.
Yes. So where are we? Labour government?
Yeah. And Stephen Kinnock, in charge of social care, who has a trans child, which is one of those things because, like, it's clearly, obviously, another way they can avoid all serious talk about this issue is acting like people are targeting his child and stuff like that. And of course, no, they haven't done that. He hasn't done that yet. But I guarantee you that's in the back pocket,
I mean, maybe my thinking about this is that it's very easy to shout from the opposition about, it's very easy to go with all the mantras and try and appease all of your, the loudest shouting people. But it's actually quite a different thing being in government and having to actually pass laws, having to actually write them, having to think them through and get support. So my guess is that they will be a lot more circumspect, actively doing things. I mean, that's my hope. I mean, people who get into, they're not completely stupid. I mean, I've been shocked at how not as smart as I thought people were over the last few years. However, I am going to say that you've become an MP, you've put the work in, you're not completely stupid, and I think they are going to have to think things through a bit more carefully. They're going to have to look to Scotland as to what happened there. Like the SNP got completely fucked over. So I'm optimistic that it's not going to be as bad as they were when they were able to just shout from the sidelines.
Well, as the other person living in the UK, I kind of wish I could share your optimism, but they seem to have. It's interesting because I get the feeling that they very much are all swimming in this kind of middle class water, people who have trans kids and all this sort of thing. As we've often said, it's a very middle class. A very middle class movement, but at least when the Tories were in power, they were slowly turning the ship around. Although Suella Braverman's speech really took them to task for overseeing the years where children were being hurt in gender clinics. I just think, I don't know, maybe there'll be an early stage of letting it all hang out, as it were, and actually trying to do some of the ridiculous things they want to do. But yeah, I mean, in terms of optimism, it couldn't be worse than it is. Per Lynn Pinches, I just saw her today talking about how she's getting back from pool now, because like she said, she wrote a tweet the other day. Actually, I'll find it while we're talking. But
I think I saw it. Shocking one, right? About the world champions, all men. Well, yeah. I think mainly the same man, but he's got all the titles.
There's two men involved. One of them harassed her when she came to see a final, he kind of followed her around, abusing her. this is a man abusing a woman who he has driven out of her sport. It's just absolutely disgusting. And yeah, I don't know. Maybe, as you say, maybe now they are in charge. It'll be a bit harder for them to, as you say, they'll have to kind of put their money where their mouth is. And as we all know, whenever people do that in this fight, they do something that's just extremely dangerous and harms women and girls. You know.
Yeah, my sort of fear, my sense of optimism is that. Yeah, now that they actually have to put into practice their rhetoric, they're probably going to find that it's much harder. But I also get a sense that their rhetoric is not as sincere as it used to be. I get a sense that none of these people believe trans women are women. They just believe that their base believes it, and they have to appease their base. So they're kind of one degree of separation from it. At least they themselves don't believe it anymore. At least most of them don't. It's just that they think it's politically useful to say that they do. And that means there's a hope that once they realize that it isn't politically useful to say that they do, it'll be that much easier for them to turn ship around, because at least they don't have to be convinced that trans women aren't women, because they already know it. They just have to be convinced that enough other people also know it, that they don't have to keep pretending anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Apparently 1 in 4 women intended to spoil their ballot. I don't know how that turned out. But yeah, I don't know. It's like we knew they were coming. We knew I was kind of hoping for great upset to throw everything into disarray, because I hate these fucking middle manager Labour types who are basically exactly the same as the Conservatives, except they pretend to be nice, you know. And it's I'm just sick of that. I'm just sick of the turn taking. Now it's your turn to rule. Now it's my turn to rule. Now it's your turn to rule. Now it's my turn to rule. And you know, people get sick of it after 8 years. They vote in new people, and then the cycle begins again. It is the least inspiring political.
It is. It's true. It's true. However,
we need some dragons. We need like the Daenerys Targaryen to come in and break the wheel with her dragons. Sorry.
So what about Waterstones then? That was interesting, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, we know that's been happening. Like you know, a Waterstones employee talked about the various ways they hide my book.
Wait, just for the non-British, Waterstones is not the chain of shitty pubs. That's something else. What's Waterstones again?
Waterstones is a bookseller.
And what's the chain of shitty pubs called?
Weatherspoon.
Weatherspoon.
Sorry. It's not.
They may be shitty, but
it's the bookseller. Okay.
They're one of the only pubs that would let women speak women in. So, you know.
I take it all back. They're wonderful. I love Weatherspoons. I love it.
So you've seen what's happened. So a woman called Tilly something. She said she posted a very, very sobbing, very crying, emotional video, saying that she'd lost her job at Waterstones because she was, you know, the usual, simply standing up for the trans community in the face of bigotry and hate. Oh, I mean, I can't remember her wording. I only watched it once. But what had actually happened was that she had said to an author who would, quite a mild thing, the author, I can't, Christine something, I can check, had replied with quite a mild tweet to someone else about safeguarding, you know, women in spaces, etc. And this woman, Tilly, had responded saying, I'm looking forward to burning your books or tearing your books up and binning them later. Yeah. And so Waterstones has fired her. And now there's a huge uproar. But obviously, you know, there's degrees of what you can get fired for, and actually saying to an author that I'm going to tear up your books is slightly different than having the opinion that men shouldn't go into women's spaces, which is what people have been fired for on our side. So.
And it's also thrown into it's also shown a very bright light on one of the most captured industries, which is publishing. I've heard stories about, you know, places like Hachette where people like, you know, there's whole whole kind of infrastructure of young women who hate J.K. Rowling, you know, and absolutely despise her, and are kind of helping to silence authors and book bloggers or whatever who are gender critical. You know, not that there's many book bloggers who are gender critical. I don't think they would survive a second. But it's one of the most, apart from theater, it's probably the most captured industry. And yeah, it's and another thing, of course, like, you know, this woman was did a video pretending to cry, and it's like, yeah, it's not nice when you lose your livelihood, is it? It's not nice when people do that to you. You know?
Yeah, Bernie Rose had a great reply when she said, like, everything she's asking for forgiveness, and she just made one little mistake, and what's the problem? And Bernie Rose was like, well, you wouldn't offer that forgiveness to anyone else. Your attitude has been vicious and utterly unrelenting and utterly uncompassionate. So, you know, it's hard not to feel the Schadenfreude in this situation. You know,
we've said
trying to be the bigger person, but I'm also like, you know what?
But we've also said so many times, haven't we? It's a really, you know, it's a fine line to tread if you want to get people banned and cancelled, because, you know, the winds of change will come along, and you've set up, you know, you've cheered on this zeitgeist. And, you know, I mean, I'd be interested to see if she's going to appeal this. I mean, because I suspect that there's slightly more to it, because Waterstones has fired her. Now, most people would have, you know, maybe a sort of a warning and, you know, don't do this again sort of thing, but Waterstones have fired her. So it's possible that, you know, she only has a part-time job and hasn't been there very long, or it's possible that this sort of thing may have happened before. It'd be interesting to see if it goes any further.
Yeah. And she was, someone just pointed out, you know, she was apologizing while also continuing to smear Christina Dalker, I think her name is, Christina Dalker, that's right, as a bigot.
Yes.
You know, I mean, they just can't help themselves, you know.
No, no, absolutely not. No, it's always the same, isn't it? It's just like when somebody's been sort of said something and they've had quite a number of responses, you know, maybe it's sort of a pile on Twitter, and you go to their feed and they've sort of written a post saying, oh my God, all of this hate I'm getting just for standing up for trans rights. It's like constant, always the same. It's that same print tweet every time. It's excellent.
Yeah. It always follows. You can tell these things follow. You know, like someone will say something incredibly, and then the threaded tweet will always say, "Uh-oh, the transphobes have found this tweet." You know, it's like, yeah, because the stupidity of it was ringing across the mountains. You know, hear it from miles away. You know, so yeah, it's you know, it's getting to the point. I'm very. What's really interesting about it, though, it's part of a greater kind of malaise that I really think we need to address before we address much more in this issue. And I know I say this a lot, but we have to take the fight to BBC. We have to take the fight to the BBC. Sorry, Artie, this is a bit localized, but basically the BBC is doing.
No, that's okay. I've heard of the BBC. It's good.
Yeah,
fine institution. I mean, they're terrible. Weatherspoon's good, BBC bad. I got it figured out now. Weatherspoon's is great, BBC's terrible. I got it. Okay.
but they're doing. They're continuing. This is like the 6th, 7th year that this social phenomenon has been, you know, just raging through society, and it has damaged a generation of children. And the BBC is still promoting it, still putting it in their children's TV shows, and this is the most important thing, still not covering it as an issue. You know, like Rachel Levine now in the US, who is, I think, the Assistant Secretary for Medicine or something like that. What is it? Medical issues, whatever. Because you can get into a habit of calling people she when you keep hearing female names. But Rachel has been discovered recently arguing for no bottom limits to surgery for minors. Surgery, not just hormones, surgery for minors, you know. It's a huge scandal. And you know, the fact that the BBC haven't even mentioned the WPATH files since the 4th of March when they were released is, you know, an abdication of duty. They're supposed to be informing the public about these issues.
Yeah,
but
it's a huge story. It's a huge story. Massive story. Yeah.
But it doesn't make them look good. And that's the thing. They just, it is, the BBC is essentially now devoted to propagandizing on behalf of the trans, on behalf of trans people. And not even trans people, drag artists. It's like every day there's a new profile of a fucking drag artist, you know? Now, some people like drag, right? Some gay people like drag, some people don't, all right? It is a very contentious subject within gay circles, Artie. I think you'll agree.
Oh, yes, very much so, yes.
Yeah, with many lesbians finding it offensive and so on, you know? Why have drag artists been chosen as the representatives of gay people, you know? Especially when you see them sometimes, like giving addresses in the White House, you know?
Yeah.
And they look like nightmare clowns, like clowns from a nightmare, you know?
Well, that's the aestheticization of all of this, right? It's same-sex attraction it's kind of like a conceptual thing. You're humans of one sex who are attracted to the same sex. It's very conceptual, it's very material, and that works its way well into the legal system. You can just say it's fine for humans of the same sex to, you know, have sex with each other and to partner with each other and to raise families with each other. But now it's all been aestheticized. Now gay is an aesthetic. That's been part of the problem with gay representation in the media, is that gay is invisible. You know, your postman could be gay. How the fuck would you know? All these people could be gay. So if you want to show your support for gays, you need an aesthetic. You need a visual thing. And that's what drag is. It's visually, that's obviously I was about to say poofter, but you can't say that. I can say that.
Yeah.
I get one free license to say it once. But then trans is that too. Trans is an aesthetic. The thing about trans, when they cast trans people, it's because they're visually not the sex they are dressing as. It's an aesthetic. And when you see all these people who are, you know, shouting for trans rights, it's because they're so visually obviously not women, these trans women. That's what makes everyone so excited to cheer for them. It's the stupidest thing. Sorry, yeah.
No, you're absolutely
right. I mean, you're right about the aesthetic. That's the whole thing with the queer, you know, the blue hair, it's sort of looking different, isn't it? It's all that community idea. I hadn't really thought of that. That's actually an interesting point.
Well, I always think of this as a kind of a youth movement, a kind of zombie youth movement. You know, youth movements in the past, since the 50s, since they invented teenagers, youth movements, you know, they usually went along with certain kinds of music, certain kinds of movie stars, certain kinds of art, and there's none of that with the trans movement. The trans movement is a hollow cultural blip that has produced no art worth experiencing, you know,
this gender movement. Yes, I mean, I would say, you know, I would make a small caveat that in the 1970s in New York City, in the grit and intensity and the upheaval of the 70s, like Andy Warhol's Factory had some, and Lou Reed and stuff, there were some interesting transsexuals in that scene who were very interesting for their time and their place. But that's just a caveat to point that out, to say that it has nothing to do with everything that's going on now with the blue hair crazies. Yeah.
The factory bunch were certainly ahead of their time, but they weren't saying they weren't pretending to be the opposite sex, you know. I mean, in such a way that they want to change, that they want to destroy, for instance, women's sports. Oh, which reminds me, let me get that. Here's that quote from Lynn Pinches. Okay, this is what's happening in pool currently. Our women's national singles champion is a man. Our women's champion of champions is a man. Our women's European champion is a man. Our women's masters champion is a man. Our women's world champions team contains a man. And you're right, this is just one man. He currently holds 4 out of the 5 major women's pool titles. You know, it's just,
I mean, that's such an incredible statistic, isn't it? That he holds 4 out of 5 of the women's pool titles. I mean, it's beyond belief. I mean, it's beyond belief. Like, you know, if you took this to somebody, like, if you took this to your MP and you said, look, this is an actual problem. This is a real problem that's happening. It's a result of these policies and everything that's being pushed. It would be so interesting to see what you know, your MP would actually say about it. I mean, they'd want to ignore it entirely, wouldn't they? Because it's such an obvious wrong.
Yeah,
I can't see how anyone can defend this. It's a clear wrong.
They defend it by just obtuseness, you know.
Yeah,
like I saw Aaron Bastani today complaining about the Waterstones woman who was fired. When has he once said anything about the hundreds of women who've lost their livelihoods because of trans activism? Never, you know. So it's you know, it's just obtuseness. And I got into a little back and forth with Ian Dale over the Suella Braverman speech, because he was like saying, "Oh, it's the most toxic, with the most hyperbolic language," and it's like, no, it's not. It's all true. The flags are flying everywhere, including on government buildings, and the flags represent the destruction of gay kids. You know, they represent the destruction of the health and bodies of gay kids. You know, so it's not a hyperbolic speech at all, and I think you'll find a lot of people are going to flock to her side when she starts, you know, basing her entire political existence on it.
Well, it's amazing that, like, if you say the same thing, and you're on, if 2 people say the same thing, but one of them's on your tribe and one of them's on the tribe you don't like, people will react like it's completely different. I remember one time I had a coworker who was like this really homophobic woman, and she was really mean, and she just really didn't like me, and she wouldn't touch anything that I had ever touched because she didn't want to get AIDS. She was a real asshole, and I was talking about it. This was years and years and years ago. I was talking about it with a friend at a dinner party or something, and I was like, "Yeah, I have this fucking asshole coworker. She's just blah 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 blah." And my friend was like, super progressive and super critical of evangelical Christians, but super defensive of Muslims, thought that this woman was Muslim. So he was pushing back at me, saying like, well, you know, you have to like let her have her differences, and, you know, you just have to put up with it. And I was like, this just seemed like a weird response. And then as the conversation carried on, he just clued in that this woman was an evangelical Christian and not a Muslim. And then instantly he was like, oh, well, she sounds like a horrible person. Yeah, you're right. It's like I was explaining the exact same thing, but when it was someone he saw as an underdog, he was like, that's loud. And when it was someone he saw as like an oppressor, he suddenly was like, instantly. But I've done it too. There have been times where Republicans have been pushing policies, say around aggressive policing of illegal immigration in the US, and I've just been appalled that it's the most racist thing in the world. And then Barack Obama would come into office and in fact enforce even stronger versions of those exact same policies. And instead of me being like, oh, that's even worse, they're doubling down on it, I'd be like, oh, it's my side now, maybe it's okay. So I've done it too. I've been guilty of the party I dislike having a policy that's exactly the same and even milder than the party I do like, and I'm hostile to one and not to the other. And you're seeing that with this case, like cancel culture. People don't understand that true and false and good and bad are actually abstract concepts that take a lot of brain power to think through. But my tribe versus your tribe is like deep and ingrained and guttural. So when somebody's saying something that's false or bad or wrong, that takes conceptual work to figure out. But if they're saying it is false or bad or wrong and they're on your tribe, it's very easy and it just comes naturally for you to want to defend it. It's really hard work to stick to the principles of truth and good. And it's really easy work to just stick with my tribe is always right. Anyways, yeah.
But it's true. I mean, this is this whole thing, isn't it, about women's spaces? Women, absolutely, we must listen to women. You know, it's all very progressive. Until the women are talking about men that they perceive to be underdogs and marginalized, and then you're a horrible bigot. I mean, I don't I think, like I was saying the other day, I think gender ideology really is, it requires dishonesty to uphold it. I mean, I don't think you can really, I haven't come across very many people who can argue it without having to resort to dishonesty or misrepresentation or pretense. You know, the best they can do, I think, is sort of play Martin Bailey and say, oh, well, no, I mean, you know, I don't believe that they're actual women, but, you know, and of course we need to talk about spaces, or, you know, sports, we should do, prisons should be one at a time, you know, each individual. It's such a difficult thing to argue for, because it requires, as you say, Adi, it requires tribalism, not logic.
Yeah. One thing that journalists, if they were doing their jobs, should do is that if a minister comes on to talk about, for instance, prison policy when it comes to transgender identified women, men, when it comes to things like transgender policy, they always do this incredible thing where they shunt the responsibility onto individual prisons. They say, well, these prisons, they have things in place, you know, and those types of things can't happen, and, you know, because they're judged on a case by case basis, you know, as if that's reassuring. You know, it's like all they're doing is they're saying this is such an impossible task to actually protect women while still putting male prisoners in the female estate, that, you know, I'm just going to avoid it completely and
just avoidance.
Prison worker. You know, I mean, I know some of you will have heard this before. I told a story. So I met someone who, it was actually Kate from Keep Prison Single Sex, and she said that when prisoners are brought back, trans-identifying prisoners are brought back when they're allowed on day release and stuff like that, they always insist that women search them when they come back. And the women who usually have to search them are, I think the term is probationary. They're younger women, because the older ones, well, they won't do it. So they order the younger women to do it, you know? So that's what's happening. That's what's happening, you know, because of the cowardice and obtuseness of these ministers. They are putting these young women in this appalling position, you know? And it's not, I'm sure it's not that fucking rewarding a job at the best of times. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Anything else? What else has been happening this week? There was...
Well, yeah, I saw today just another one of these. I saw another rational man come along. I don't know if you've seen it on Twitter. I was just browsing earlier, and I saw, you know, somebody else who's decided to come along, and, you know, a bloke who's, I mean, I think he's quite good on quite a lot of issues, but he's come along. He's obviously not thought about it, you know, that deeply, and he has begun to say, oh, well, actually, you know, there are different issues here. And they're separate, which is, you know, one, you can call, you should be able to call people by their preferred names and pronouns, but you can still argue for not, you know, trans exclusion from sport. And, you know, you only have to think of it for a very small amount of time to realize that what you're asking here is for somebody to legitimize an ideology that they completely oppose before they're allowed to actually argue against it. I mean, it's just, and then he actually even uses the words, be kind. I mean, like, how is it possible that these people have just come along and thought, oh, I know people have been arguing about it for ages, but I'm just not going to I'm not going to sort of listen to what these women have got to say. I am just going to pronounce as rational man that this is what we should be able to do.
Yeah.
To be fair, he's had a lot of responses. I've been quite enjoying them.
Oh, good. Who is it, Helen? Who is it?
What is his name on?
Was it Ian Gale?
No. He's smaller than that. It's a bloke called Spinning Hugo.
Right. Okay. Well, you know, but But it's the same, and it's another, and it leads back to this BBC question I've been talking about. Because the reason that these people are always taken by surprise when they get a lot of pushback is they just genuinely don't know there's a debate, and they genuinely don't know the various frames of the debate. It's already 5:34. That was quick. Sascha is here, and yeah. How did we speak for 34 minutes? I just didn't notice it. Listen, I just wanted to say before I bring in Sascha, I'm sorry, I'm a little low energy today because I've just been to the dentist, so half my face is frozen. I apologize for that. So let's bring him in because we're already a bit late with him. Sascha, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize the time. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing? How's my audio?
Hello, Sascha.
Your audio sounds perfect. Sounds delightful.
Yeah, no, I'm really good. How are you guys?
Not too bad. Not too bad.
Really happy to have you. Great to see you.
Yes, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. The dogs just joined us. The dogs just joined us for this part.
No, I was listening to what you're all talking about. It's depressing that the amount of kind of common sense seems to just not exist in the world, or at least in this region.
Yeah, you put something really well when you said that people have a gun to their heads, and it's like they have to go along with everything or they're canceled. And I thought that was so succinct. I'm going to steal that, and I'm going to use that all the time.
Oh, no, thanks. No, that was that was like the headline of the Mail article, which is the first one that I was in. But it's true. It's silly. We should be able to talk about this stuff, and whatever your viewpoint is on it, we should be able to objectively just speak about it. It's silly that it's kind of it's reaching levels of lunacy where it just doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah.
Are you finding that other people are agreeing with that? Are you starting to notice a change? Like you're very much in the art world and in the London scene. I imagine you must have a little bit of a finger on the pulse of how it's playing out on the ground level, at least in that world.
Yeah, so the amount of people who have spoken to me during this whole thing and said that they're really happy what I'm doing, fashion designers, actors, models, all sorts have reached out, because my Instagram is obviously from when I was kind of in that industry more. So a lot of the stuff that I post on there, the people who are looking I've not got a huge following, but the people who are looking are all quite significant in the different spaces. And I've also received, it's amazing what people will message you but not actually say. But it's been overwhelming, like the level of kind of people saying, thank God someone's finally talking about this, or thank God it's kind of coming from this angle, because it is something that's worrying people. I mean, there's a lot, especially the older generations of kind of homosexual men. They seem to be one of the most concerned about this, especially in the fashion industry. And obviously, they're mostly the big players. Because it just seems to come out of nowhere, and these people have known transsexual people for their whole lives, and a lot of them will say this is just not the same thing. It's something is fundamentally a bit different about it.
Yeah, and am I right in saying that it kind of wasn't until the Daily Mail piece and the gossip kind of columns that came out, it wasn't until you started examining it. It wasn't until they appeared that you took a wider view of it. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, that would be. So initially, I initially got pulled into all of this kind of unwillingly, because the story was leaked into the Daily Mail by someone else, and then I was scared that the stuff about transgenderism was going to come out, so I just ended up telling them. And then, in all honesty, since then I have been kind of going, all right, well, if I'm on my soapbox, I'm going to use that advantage. But it's and speak about it, because someone has to. And then also, since the Daily Mail article came out where that quote was, I'm pretty sure that I was fundamentally cancelled from that point. So I'm kind of just going with it. But yeah, it's I would say that I didn't know the full extent. I knew something was up, but during the time since the Mail article came out, I've taken to read quite a lot of books, Time to Think, things like that. And I didn't realize the scale of the apathy. So like the non-caring about the actual consequences of this, because and in some of the conversations I've had with people who are more kind of just on the fence or haven't thought about it a lot, you bring up a lot of the like young people and the surgery thing. Like they this thing about the younger you do it, the better seems to get floated around, because you can be more acclimated to society or whatever. But they're not thinking about like the functional element of that. Like they're not thinking about what the surgeries mean. They're just thinking about it's like before I came on, you were talking about the aesthetics. It is just all aesthetics. There's no functionality to any of this.
And even the aesthetics are terrible, because I'm sure you've seen what happened with the rolled up piece of arm flesh that is turned into a fake penis.
No, it's horrid.
I mean, they are like Pringles cans, but
yeah, they are. But they're no. Do you know they're more like
aesthetics, those, right? Not function.
They're more like those giant sausages that are twisted. You know what I mean? They're kind of twisted in. They hang there above the vagina. They can, there's no way they're having sex with these.
No, it's like a display piece.
It's really often. Yes, a display. It's simply just that. But I thought that I retweeted a video the other day that somebody found, and it was 3 men on TikTok, and they were actually very well made up. They were really quite on TikTok they were passing-ish, but talking about their surgery.
Oh, I see.
And they were sort of just the having to constantly dilate and the closing up and the smell and having to go back for different operations, and it's constant maintenance. And one of them was just openly saying, like, I wish I'd have known. I should never have done this. I should never have done this, and I want other people to know about it. It's just terrible. Sascha, are you able to tell us a little bit of your story for people who don't,
yeah, sure.
Have the background?
The short end of like the background is that I've suffered from a kind of form of dysphoria since I was very young, in one way or another. But then in times of kind of stress and difficult times, it kind of comes out in a way of not really wanting to be myself. And as I've got older in the last 2 years since I kind of went through that, I've come to kind of reflect that maybe it wasn't a feeling of wanting to be the other gender or something like that. It was more of a feeling of just, I don't want to be me in this moment, and I want to escape myself and be something else. And then during a very difficult time in my life, when for alternate reasons, my marriage was already falling apart, I decided that would be a good time to go trans. So I went through the process. I got diagnosed in Tokyo, in a very short amount of time, in about 10 minutes. I don't know if I have them on hand, but I found some of the documents the other day from the kind of questionnaire that they asked me. Yeah. And they handed me all of the risks that are associated with HRT in complete Japanese, the entire document. So nothing, I had to use like Google Translate with the lens to decode it. And then there was also the questionnaires that they asked me were things like, when you were growing up, what color bag did you have? So, like, first of all, I don't remember what color school bag I had. Second of all, if you're in that position and you don't really remember and you want the treatment, you're going to pick pink or purple because that's what they want you to say. So yeah, went through that. And then after everything kind of fell apart, in my marriage, again, as much as it was related to transgenderism, it kind of wasn't. I was in a pretty abusive situation aside from that. After that fell apart, I came back to England, and I was still very much going to go forward with it. And then after a short amount of time, after a couple of months, I met the right person, and who met me as a friend, and just kind of reflected what I was saying back at me, like mirrored it. And I started, the more she mirrored it back to me, the funnier I found it, in the sense of like, that's what really, I think that's what I've been maybe trying to get across is in a lot of my interviews, without saying it directly, is this stuff is absurd. And if you actually repeat what someone is saying back to them, a lot of people will laugh. And the moment that someone laughs is when you've got them. You've broken the kind of the spell. And if someone doesn't laugh and they're very serious about it, and this is the right decision for them, that's great too. But I think a lot of younger people are just not being confronted with, but it's kind of funny, isn't it? And if they were, I think a lot of them would change their way of thinking about it, is because it's all become very, very serious. If we were able to make it silly again, and there might also be why a lot of the comedy around it has kind of disappeared, is because we're not allowed to make it silly anymore. If we were to make it silly, people would notice how silly it is, and then it would probably wake a lot of people up.
No, absolutely. And can I ask, were you, when people, transition means different people, different things to different people. Were you preparing to go the surgical direction, or were you just going to take hormones?
At the time, I was focused on the idea of just top surgery, facial surgery, all the aesthetic stuff, very much. And then the surgeon who I met with, he was very on the idea that, if you're going to do this, you have to go all the way. So he was kind of pushing it in a way. So initially, no, I wouldn't have gone down the bottom surgery route because it's something I knew a lot about. And I think a lot of trans people would agree with this too, is the technology just frankly isn't there. Yeah. And then I wasn't going to go down that route, but I do think if I had started, one always wants to get to the top of the mountain. So 6 months down the line, my mind probably would have been changed because that's what they're pushing you towards in the end. They want you to go all the way. And at the time I was in Japan, the law was a bit different. So now it's changed recently, but the law was you couldn't change your gender unless you were completely sterilized. So that for them it was a part of the function. That has recently changed. They appealed the law because it was anti-trans or whatever. But so for me, I don't. But then that's the other thing is this whole idea of like changing your gender on government documents. I don't actually understand why that's a part of it, because if you feel like the other gender, then just own it, just be it. Like, why do you need the government's approval to tell you are that thing? That's a part of it that I also find a little bit confusing because, when I was going to do it, and my mindset at the time was very much like, well, if I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to have to be some level of tough, and I'm going to have to be close in my identity and happy with my identity. Other people are probably not going to, respect that, but that's fine. I should be strong enough in me. Because even when I was going to do it, I don't think I would have put myself into like the woke category. There was a sense of reality of, I don't expect other people to respect who I am, but if I'm going to do this, I'm going to have to be tough enough to be who I am, if that makes sense.
Yes.
It does,
There's one thing I find interesting about it is that, I was talking about Australia and Ireland and Scotland, which have all fallen under the gender, the spell of gender, to a greater or lesser degree. But I'm also kind of confused that the fashion and modeling and industry fell for it as well, because hasn't there always been a kind of tradition of what's the word?
Androgynous?
Androgyny, yes, in the industry anyway. How did it happen that suddenly people decided that androgynous people were some kind of space alien that just has arrived on Earth?
I can't say exactly, but trends, head in the direction. And what I could say is when I was about 17, I modeled in Japan, and the trend of kind of, because they bring the Western people from all over that they like the most, and the trend right then in 17, so it would have been about 2012. The trend then was kind of emaciated, quote unquote, kind of druggy guys was the look with like long greasy hair. And then when I went back recently, and I did it very briefly when I kind of needed some work, but the trend had changed, so those kind of feminine looking guys had changed now into pure androgyny to the point where they could be either gender, and then it slowly moved towards kind of actual transgender people. So I think that I don't know if it's just a progression thing where, okay, we've started off this trend, we like feminine guys, the end point is going to be something insane, or if it feels, because it does. It's not necessarily with fashion trends. It's not like that it's pushed from the top down, but if a big runway campaign is done by someone and it's featuring all transgender people from like a big brand, suddenly all the other brands are going to want to do that because they think, oh, that's the hip thing. So it's not like someone's controlling it. It's kind of like an organic sort of top down thing that happens. And it is very odd. It's odd that that's where it's gone. But if you're always looking for the new thing, eventually the new thing's going to become really strange.
That's very interesting.
But extreme trends in fashion also become very passé very quickly. Fads become, if extreme trends like extreme bell bottoms, they collapse as spectacularly as they rise because they're so extreme. And if we're talking about extreme androgyny and trans as a fashion trend, there's already, you're saying, concern privately among a lot of the top fashion designers and a lot of people in this industry. That's a sign that this trend is going to pass very quickly. And I'm hearing chatter of things like coastal elites in the media industry and in the technology industry are already stepping back from giving their children special pronouns and stepping back from this. So if the elites are already moving away from it, then it's a matter of time before it collapses really quite quickly, it sounds like to me. There might be a reversion back to like normcore or something like that.
Yeah. Well, it's like I think the businesses who are running on it are realizing that, yeah, the product isn't there to sell. Like there's not enough of a percentage of people to actually sell this to. And in a funny sort of way, that sort of free market stuff might actually save us, because eventually when the marketing campaigns as well, a lot of the time they're just marketers being ballsy. Like the Gillette campaign, they probably know that's the exact purpose of that is probably to piss people off. It's not actually to sell razors, because they sell razors. They're going to sell the same amount of razors whether they do a good ad campaign or a bad ad campaign. So they may well do something that's going to annoy everyone, and at least everyone's talking about their brand for a few months. Money well spent. Like, I do think a lot of it isn't actually like in the ideology, so to speak. It's done exactly to get the reaction from
the Kanye effect, right? If you do something ballsy and shocking, the anger dissipates within 3 months, but the name recognition lasts forever. Yep.
Sascha, I wanted to add, because it's something we've never really, I don't think we've ever discussed it on the show. And it's how your story was framed, I think, originally by the Daily Mail. I'm wondering how much you agree with it or how much it's a real phenomenon. But the phrase transmaxxing is one that I hear associated with your story. Is it a word that you identify with? I mean, do you think that's what you were going through? And,
no.
Can you explain what it is?
The confusing part about that is like, so a few months after I got back and I was still kind of on the fence about transitioning, I started looking into other online groups. And I happened to also run this magazine called FOMO, which is Fear of Missing Art, which is an art magazine. But there's a lot of weird events that came together. And then basically everyone else who was running this art magazine left and gave me free reign. And I always wanted to write articles about kind of humans. So I ended up cross with this, investigating the group of the Transmaxxers. The thing that I will say is, while I had no idea this group existed when I was going to transition, there are a lot of things that they preach that I do agree with. I mean, and I would have agreed with when I was transitioning. And that's what I found really interesting, because this group was saying the quiet part out loud. Where it's not necessarily that they meant it in a harmful way. I think a lot of people get the Transmaxxing thing wrong because of the Channel 4 documentary. Most of it is just like people being somewhat logical and within reality. There's a lot of weird stuff mixed in there, but the trans people I met in those groups came across to me as more normal, in the sense that they didn't want to take over other people's lives. They didn't want to do anything of that. They just wanted to exist on their own. So that was what I found interesting, is it was like a part of that movement that wasn't the monolith. It wasn't something I would identify with, but I mean, I stop in and check some of their YouTube channels every so often because they're interesting. One of them, called Kat, actually interviews a lot of detransitioners now. So it's kind of, it's almost like a lot of them were the more traditional kind of transsexuals that you would have thought, but they're a bit lost and homeless at the moment. But no,
that be in the sense that like they're sort of more concerned about themselves, and it's a very internal.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're not concerned about other people. They don't care what you think. They're like, this is for me and myself. I'm isolated. I'm on the internet a lot. I'm alone, and I'm going to do this to myself, and it's just me and my own business. I think that's what you mean.
That's what I'm trying to get across. Yeah. So I found them interesting. I interviewed them for the magazine, and the magazine actually has a whole lot of other articles in it too, which are really kind of culturally relevant at the moment. But yeah, and then I just I think it's been connected to my story because I used a lot of the interviews that I had there as an allegory to say, you know, when I went on GB News, I didn't want to just come on there and say it's just me who thinks this and this is everything. I also wanted to give an example of people who actually existed. You know, when we're talking about the incels or anything like that, it's like, hey, these people exist. And the other thing that annoyed me quite a lot is, over the year or so since I published that article, I've seen a lot of people online saying the Transmaxxing thing is a meme, it's a joke, it's not real. When there's footage online of a person saying, I'm Tina, I'm an incel, and I escaped inceldom by transmaxing. So like, it's these people are real. It's been this sort of, it's the mugginess of the fact that the label is kind of funny, that you're missing, that there's basically, there are just these people who are being honest about their ideas and why they're doing this. But then some of them are just like right-wing trans people who don't want to be in the trans selection. So it's like, that's what I mean. It's not a monolithic group. It's just a group of kind of the outcasts from that sort of cult.
Wow. Okay. So you mentioned Japan and you spent some time in there. I know there's a phenomenon, I forget what it's called now, where there are a lot of young Japanese men who feel isolated from society and just kind of lock themselves. Is there a link, do you think, between transmaxing and that phenomenon?
Well, I feel Japan's always a little bit behind us in trends, so I would feel that I don't know what's going to happen there because they're very pragmatic as a culture, but the trans thing, the trans kind of ideology stuff is starting to hit over there, and I do think with the hikikomori types, there is a possibility that they have like a flood from these sort of people, because a lot of them, because it's not like inceldom in the sense that women can be hikikomori as well. In fact, a lot of them are women, and it's because it's a hard phenomenon to explain, because it's basically you don't want to be involved with the world because it's far too difficult, and Japanese parents kind of blame themselves for bringing up their kids that way, so they're quite happy to, well, they're not happy, but they'll let them live in their house forever, and they'll feed them through a closed door, and it's like a total isolation. But there's this video games, which is it's got a lot of similarities. They're pulled into video games, they're pulled into an online world. They up until recently, they wouldn't have even had the framework for the trans thing. So who knows how it's going to hit that population, because they do have, there's far more of them than there are. I don't want to say exact numbers, but there's far more of the Japanese version of incels than there are of our version. So it could be the sort of flood, or it could also be that their society is just, their culture is just very different, the way they look at things. It's hard to put an exact like some things they'll hear from the West and they'll just think it's silly, and like they wouldn't even entertain it as an idea. One example is the 1870s. They tried to ban homosexuality in Japan, and the emperor did it because England did it, and he thought, oh, that's the right thing to do. But no one cared in the country, so after 10 years it just got repealed because everyone was like, I don't understand how this is our problem. But it's like, so they have this kind of like, you know, they could change the law there, but everyone would just be like, well, that's silly, and not do it. So the law just ends up being changed because it's redundant.
Oh, that's interesting, because they've just brought in self-ID. Did you know this? Japan has just brought in self-ID, I believe. Genevieve Gluck told me today. And apparently it's going down like a bucket of cold sick. There's any kind of tweet about it is being ratioed, you know. And also they're pointing out, which I found very interesting, they're pointing out that other countries have introduced it, and it's been a disaster. You know, Scotland with you know, Nicola Sturgeon's downfall, and Vadrakar quitting because he suggested taking the word mother out of the Irish Constitution. It's just kind of not like going down well, and Japan, as you say, has arrived a bit late to a party that might be finishing, you know. So,
amazing in Japan, though. There's so much Japanese anime and manga, and there's so much sexual paraphilia and fetish within. So many subcultures in Japan, famously, you know, with schoolgirl outfits and all those kinds of things. It almost seems like every single element of that phenomenon, or at least the autogonophilia part of this, is ready and ripe for the taking in Japan. It's amazing that it hasn't taken off yet.
I don't know if you know, there's a lot of Japanese animes that are very, very suspect, even not just for the trans thing, for other stuff too. But I don't know if there's a level of, because they talk about this stuff and they have done forever, if there's a level of there's not as much repression, so it's less likely to come out as this big thing. It's blown off in little bits of steam. At least, that's kind of their there's a lot of Japanese theory on a lot of this stuff, which, you know, I personally disagree with, but that's even their theory on, you know, more dark stuff, is that if you don't allow the steam to come out, the whole thing will explode in a much worse way. So I don't know if with, you know, like you said, the trans thing has kind of been like a fantasy in anime for a very long time. There's all those kind of body switching ones, so it's like
I don't know. I was a child, all the body switching, sex swapping was the thing in every Japanese anime. Sorry.
So it's, I don't know if, because there's, I mean, it could be either one of two ways, because that's so implanted in their culture, it could create a flood, or it could be that they've seen it enough times in some sort of visual thing that they're like, okay, well, it's not, you know, it's for fantasy, it's silly. I honestly don't know. It's hard to say. I will say though, in Tokyo, I met more transgender people than I've ever met in any other place.
Oh, really? Wow.
Both Western and Japanese.
Right.
Yeah, so it's again, I mean, Tokyo is a huge city. There's like 60 million people if you include Yokohama and Kawasaki. So it could just be about the volume of people in that place. But I've never met so many trans people.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Male and female trans people.
Male and female, both. It was because a lot of people from the West will come over there because it is more accepting of us as a society in the sense that it's more accepting. They just don't care what you do as long as you can do your job, and it's not interfering with your job and it's not in public. They could not care less what you do at all. So it's not that
not
it's
in public though. So like this is a sort of nightlife subculture of transness that
you wouldn't. No. I mean, you can be like in public. What they mean is, I would say that's more towards the sexual element. If you're going to walk around and be trans, that's fine, whatever. But if you're going to make it in an over sexualized way, people in public would probably have a problem with you.
Right. What about spaces? Are they?
I've never heard that come up. The older, see, this is the thing. I made a post about this thing. It's not too uncommon to see an old man in Japan walking around dressed as a schoolgirl in central Tokyo.
Right.
But the idea that man would say he's a woman and want to go in women's toilets would be unthinkable. It would just be that this is a man who's okay. We're going to walk on the other side of the street. It's a bit odd, but the younger ones, it's not really come up. It could be because Japanese people like to keep to themselves, or it could also be because, on a level of passing, objectively Asian people are much more likely to pass. And I don't know for sure, but I also, I didn't ask, but I also think there is this level of kind of societal respect where I think a lot of people wouldn't, even if they were full transition, depending on the situation they're in, they would choose to use a female toilet or not. Like, the example would be, okay, at a nightclub, at a bar, using the female toilet might not be as crazy as using it at, say, a school or a gym. It's that's what I mean. I think people just have a little bit more of common sense. At this gay club, probably be okay if I go to the female toilet. At this school, definitely not. Like there's just a level of common sense that we've seemed to have lost.
That's really
what you're describing sounds like what the gay village has looked like since the 90s. You get eccentric old men walking down the street dressed weirdly in that context, and you just cross the street and you kind of whatever. And then you've got, the washrooms are pretty much unisex and there's cross-dressing people all over the place in the gay community, and everybody's fine with it because everybody knows what sex everyone is, and everyone has at least some sense of boundaries, that this is a zone where you can take some liberties, that we're not going to expect that the rules are the same everywhere else. That seemed fine to me. I had no problem with any of that. I'm not a hardliner about any of this stuff at all. It's just in the West, it's gotten so outrageous with literal extremism and pushing every possible boundary. Yeah.
But I've often said this. I've often pointed this out, which is that the rules of a gay space. There's two reasons that you can't broaden it out to greater society. One is for the reasons you're talking about, but also because it destroys that gay space. It's like, I think if for instance, this idea that everything has to be queered, queering children's literature, queering this, queering that. The reason why people love the films of John Waters, for example, is because it is a place they could escape to, So when that becomes mainstream, there's nothing to queer.
Well, the fun people have left. It's gone from being a bit subversive to literally, invading. Exactly what you said. And what I was saying is, it's in this microcosm, in this little universe of the gay community, this was always fine. But you can't put that out to the rest of society, because the rest of society just isn't like that. And also, you're not only putting people who need those safe spaces at risk, you are actually also putting the trans people who think that they're allowed to just walk into other spaces at risk. And it's just a situation that's actually, it's just causing harm to everyone to have this kind of illogical blinder on. I mean, the subjective part of it is to be subjective, but to use your brain, like I was saying, it's the gay club changing room is probably fine, but every other space in society is probably not going to be. It's just, but people had that level of, maybe it's a level of shame that people don't have anymore. They just had some sort of like, oh, this is, I can be myself in this place, but I have to know that there are other people who are going to not want me to do that in this place, and I should respect that. We should respect other people.
Well, you said the scale of apathy shocked you earlier, and that really hit me in the gut. Again, it's so succinct and perfectly put, because it's the scale of the apathy that is so shocking. People signal, cheap, easy signaling that they're for trans rights, and then all the hard work of really getting into understanding what's going on. And if you really empathize with people, you're going to actually have to be critical of a lot of this stuff. And the scale of the apathy is part of the problem. That's why I think this stuff has gotten out of control, is because, and I think it's a lot to do with these extremely fetishistic autogynephilic men who made a lot of demands that broke the system. They demanded that people not pay, that people not empathize. They demanded that you're not allowed to look closely. Don't look at me. Don't ask questions. And you said earlier that there's not enough humor in this. Well, that's just it. There's a great quote from Margaret Atwood. Men are afraid that women will laugh at them. Women are afraid that men will kill them. And you see a lot of videos online of these autogynephilic middle-aged men dressed ridiculously age inappropriately and ridiculously sexually and fetishistically, going on about how they're so terrified of women. And what they mean is they're afraid that they're going to be laughed at. They look silly. They're dressed completely silly, and they're terrified of being laughed at. So they've gone out and policed the humor out of this. And they policed all the sort of, everybody's not allowed to laugh. Everybody's not allowed to chuckle. Everybody's not allowed to say, look, I empathize with you. You've got a bit of eccentricity in your life, but you've got to put some boundaries around it. That's exactly the point right there, where these activists said you're not allowed to do that anymore. And that's when everything fell apart. I think it's pretty easy to have a kooky uncle who likes to cross-dress in the privacy of his own home to tolerate that and live and let live. And he goes out to some fetish bar once a month, you know. I think that's a lot easier for society to cope with than when he's absolutely pushing all the boundaries and saying you're not allowed to laugh, you're not allowed to find it silly that he's dressed like a schoolgirl when he's, you know, in his 50s. You know, like, we don't want it in our faces. We don't want to be told to shut up about how it's making us feel. That point right there is, I think, exactly where things fell apart, when people were told you're not allowed to laugh.
Well,
it's why I think Graham is so important in this.
The separation of those two types of people as well, because I think the other thing that's like important to remember is when most people think of the trans issue, most people who haven't been exposed to the information, they're thinking of the trans influencer. That's who pops into their mind. They're thinking of someone who has been very successful with the transition, who doesn't, you know, invade spaces, or at least is respectful to some degree. Or they're thinking of that person, and they're thinking, why should that, you know, beautiful thing be attacked in this sort of way? Whereas if the reality and the thing that a lot of other people are seeing is what is essentially men who have had no power in their lives finding a way to have power over women through doing this thing that they may have been predisposed to. But these are two very different things, and the problem is mostly coming from the side of these, you know, to put it another way, I don't think there is any conceivable realistic way that a athlete who transitions is doing it for honest reasons. Like, who transition to be a man to compete against women. That's something where they're gaming the system. And that's what we have to be aware of, is if someone is doing something and it is objectively better for them in their competitive environment, then that's something that we should be a little bit alert of, is that there's people who are doing it for some kind of a benefit. Whereas there are other people who most definitely are doing it, well, they may get benefits from it, but they're doing it for some other reason, which isn't sexualized. And I think, at least what I try to present, and the reason I do use pronouns, is because I'm remembering that there are a lot of people just starting out on this journey, and those people, if they see you talking about the deeper stuff immediately, then they're going to get turned off because they don't know about all of that stuff. They have to be led through that kind of journey to find that truth. They can't, to them, the trans influencer is the person. That's who represents trans people. And that the general population, you know, unfortunately, who haven't looked into it, that's always to them who will represent it until that kind of level of propaganda is broken down and the reality of it all is. You know, the detransitioners like Rishi are so important speaking out, because people who have gone all the way down the path and then it's gone so horribly wrong, it's awful. But it is so important to hear those voices, because I think those are the ones are the reality check. Those people who have, you know, I'm lucky I stopped when I did. But the people who have gone all the way and then decided not to are this, you know, the big reality check.
So what's in the future for you, Sascha? Are you working closely with GenSpec, for instance? Are you meeting kids who are confused? What are you doing in terms of your activism now?
So since I've been doing this, I've met with quite a lot of people, both in real life and online. Actually, the only people I've really met with so far are female to, well, people who are considering going female to male. And I hopefully have put some ideas that will make them more comfortable with keeping their bodies intact. But then also on the other end, I'm writing a book at the moment, but I'm also kind of just trying to see, I'm still at the stage where I'm trying to see where all the pieces fit exactly. And I want to make as much difference as possible in the way that I can. And thus far speaking and having this kind of nuanced position has turned a lot of people on to opening their mind to thinking maybe this isn't a good idea to do. And my focus with all of this stuff is very much on the prevention. When people have already gone through with it and done it, I genuinely feel there are enough activists talking about that sort of stuff. There are enough people speaking about that. If I can get through to people before they've made that decision, and even if they decide to, be trans or adopt some other identity after I've spoken to them, but with less of a harmful mindset, that is still a success. If I can help in some way to stop people in the first place from doing it, then we won't have a lot of the other problems later on.
Yeah, at the very least, you can tell them what the actual outcome of these operations is going to be and these drugs, I mean, what I find so shocking, the video Helen mentioned, is that no one tells these kids what's going to happen. No one tells what the surgery is going to be like. No one tells them they're going to be, like, I believe dilating sometimes takes an hour and a half. Can you imagine having...
Every day.
Insane.
Now it could be wrong. I could be wrong, but I did hear that as a number. But I just think that what you're talking about is wonderful, and I think it's and what you say about pronouns, I totally agree with people like yourself who are trying to reach kids using preferred pronouns as a way to earn their trust and stuff like this. Makes absolute sense to me.
It's not really I guess because I was going to be trans and I thought about it a lot. To me, it kind of comes naturally, and I understand it confuses a lot of people, but on the context of what you're talking about, the pronouns generally make sense as long as someone's put in the effort. I will say, and by effort, I don't mean passing. I literally mean effort. So if someone turns up with a full face of facial hair, you're probably going to slip into the male pronouns. But if you can see someone's really made the effort, you'll probably automatically say the female ones. That's what I kind of mean by that is, other than some very exclusive circumstances, women don't generally have beards. It's like
they do when they're little old ladies living outside in very hot countries. But Sascha, we've hit the hour. I just wanted to say I think it's great what you're doing. Please keep doing it, and if there's ever anything we can promote or help you with on here, and if you ever, for instance, met someone that doesn't necessarily agree with us, who would still want to speak, that would be interesting too. So
I'll send them your way. I'd be more than happy to.
Yeah, keep that in mind.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks very much for coming on. That was really interesting.
Yeah,
I'm glad you liked it.
And I don't want to sound like my parents, but I think you're a very decent young man. It's really great to see, and just good luck, and hopefully I'll see you around London one of these days. We must get together.
Really overawed by you're just so you have such an intelligent perspective on this, and you have such a profoundly moving story as well. But your perspective and your way to get right to the point, your incisive language is a real refreshing pleasure, and I hope I get a chance to speak to you again as well, because I'd like to speak to you more. There's so much I want to talk about, and it sounds like you've run ahead so fast, and you've got such a brilliant insight into this.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Good. Well,
thank you.
I will see you next time. I'll see you around London as well. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye. Bye.
So much.
Oh,
that was excellent, wasn't it? Really
amazing.
So I do sound
it's like he's like a professor, doctor in gender studies in the sensible, logical sense. Like, he's just such a brilliant man who's got so much incredible insight, and he's such a great speaker. Wow.
That was very good. Very good.
Yeah, we kind of made a mess of our scheduled shows. We were going to do one on Wednesday, and then Sunday passed, and we couldn't do it. So I think we'll probably aim for. What are we doing? I don't actually know what we're doing. Are we aiming for this time every week, or are we still going to do the idea where we try for Sunday?
I would prefer to try for Wednesday, and if we can't do Wednesday, do Sunday. That would be my preference.
Okay, Artie, that okay with you?
That works for me. Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Well, then hopefully we will be back next week at the same
Wednesday,
time.
Absolutely.
We got some great guests coming up, including Kara Dansky, I know wants to speak to us, and a few other people who have just popped up recently who've got some interesting things to say.
Excellent.
Yeah. So sorry again. I was low energy. My jaw is still not feeling anything. So hopefully
that was a good show.
I'll be better next week.
You didn't seem low energy at all. You seemed delightful as always.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Is there anything else that people want to say before we go?
Smash that like button.
Yeah.
And visit your local Weatherstones, a fine establishment. I never said they sucked. It never happened. No.
And also Buy Box by Christine. Was it her name? Christine Dacker. Yeah. Buy Box, which is not like a very kind of feminist tract or anything like that. It is a page-turning science fiction novel that wasn't be made into a film until all this kicked off. So she's very much someone to support. Thank you, Charles. Christina Dalker, that's her name. Very much someone to support. Get her book.
Weatherspoons is what I meant. I think British words, they all sound the same to me. See you all online, and thanks for joining us in the chat. See you soon, guys. Bye-bye.
See you soon, guys. Bye.